there's not a lot of cutting that has to be done with that steak, other than just take it out of your grind pile and put it into the cuts bin to be vacuum packaged and sent out the door. It's as easy as that.
Welcome to MeatsPad. In collaboration with the American Meat Science Association, it's a platform dedicated to share breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the global meat industry. On each episode, you'll have the opportunity to listen and learn from meat specialists and professionals about the whole meat industry. This podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Meat Export Federation, Ultrasource, equipment and supplies for the meat and food industry, Viscofan Collagen Casings, the best alternative to animal gut casings for a better taste and sustainable sausage making, EFA, slaughter and meat processing tools.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. This is your humble host, Phil Bass. Here in the wintry north, yes, it is still a little wintry, even though we are technically in spring. Apparently, Mother Nature did not get that memo, but I think it's coming very, very soon. Hopefully, we'll start to get a little bit of a grass is sprouting up here. Good for the cattle, good for the grazing, good for everyone, the moisture that we have been getting. So much appreciated that way, Mother Nature. We have with us a guest who I have gotten to know pretty well over the years, and I don't want to allude to too much because I'm going to have her share her experience with things. But we have with us Sierra Jepsen. Sierra, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm so well. Thank you so much for having me.
Good. Well, so I'll break the news to the group. Sierra Jepsen just recently finished her master's degree in meat science here at the University of Idaho with our team. I was grateful to have her here. The time did not go long enough because Sierra is such a driven individual that she completed a little earlier than usual, which is awesome, which is really cool. Puts her back out and into the workforce. And I'll also say Sierra is quite the fabricator, and I think beef in particular, but other species as well. But some of her research, which is what I want to share with the group today, predominantly had to do with beef fabrication. So Sierra, can you talk a little bit about that top sirloin project that you worked on, and what it means to the meat community?
Absolutely. So the top sirloin is a subprimal of the loin primal. And because it's from the loin, there hasn't been a lot of meat fabrication research or muscle profiling on it because the sirloin sells fairly well. It's got its place in mid-range restaurant industries. Top sirloin steaks are fairly popular. They sell decently at the grocery store. And so there just wasn't a lot of research that needed to be conducted, was kind of the consensus, because hey, it sells, so just leave it alone. But what was kind of realized with the top sirloin butt is comprised of 4 different muscles, and the gluteus medius being the main muscle, yes, that muscle sells really well. The culotte, the top sirloin cap, the scientific name being the biceps femoris, it sells fairly well, or it's starting to. It's starting to gain some traction. So those 2 bigger muscles are doing great. But then there are 2 other muscles that kind of sit on top, and they're being incorporated into ground beef trim, which is fine. Ground sirloin's popular. We need ground beef, but what if we are missing out on a cut of beef that could actually be another stakeable item, another grillable item? And we know that our consumers are always looking for something that can be put on the grill. So even though the sirloin sells well, what if we're missing out? So let's go ahead and instead of just cutting sirloins into big slabs of meat and incorporating all 4 muscles into one steak, let's separate them out. Let's take a look at how muscle size might change based on the size of the carcass that it's coming from. And then let's dive deeper and look at some of the muscle physiology and look at water holding capacity or the color or even the tenderness of those muscles and see if we can do a comparison.
So, yeah, and this is very important, I would say, not just for the big processors, but especially for the littler processors out there who might be looking for those little bits of added margin. And you have maybe that more eclectic and dynamic clientele where you don't necessarily have to have everything all the time, but this is something that you might be able to accumulate over time with some great added value beyond just making ground beef, which again, we have some tremendous pull through demand for ground beef in the industry right now. But there's always that question of, can we make more grillable items? And the reality is, I mean, over the past several years, the bovine myology research that was conducted with the University of Nebraska and University of Florida in the early 2000s did a fantastic job at profiling these muscles, but there was still a little bit more that we could do. And so that was something that Sierra was looking at. And so first off, Sierra, let's dive just a little bit deeper into this and talk about those particular cuts that we can peel and pull and piece apart from the top sirloin, and just kind of remind everyone just how important it is to do that, because you'd be surprised just how many folks are still kind of just slabbing whole top sirloins just because it's quick, it's high yield, but there's value to be made.
Oh, and it's so easy just to take a big piece of meat and cut steaks out of it. Absolutely. And even so, the gluteus medius being the primary center section of that top sirloin, there, even within just that one muscle, there is a dorsal subunit and a ventral subunit. And for anybody who may have ever cut a sirloin, you don't want to just cut that gluteus medius right down the middle. You actually want to find the seam between the ventral and the dorsal section. It is a big piece of connective tissue, and you want to find that seam and actually follow it. And that's how you then create a baseball sirloin versus just a top sirloin cut, is making sure that that seam of connective tissue doesn't end up right in the middle of your top sirloin steak. And so that's kind of one of the first problems that you find is, if you go to an Applebee's or a Texas Roadhouse and you order a top sirloin steak, the person sitting next to you might have a really tender eating experience. And then you yourself had a tough one. And you're like, I don't know, we ordered the same cut. Well, if that ventral and dorsal subunit were not cut along that seam of connective tissue, somebody might have gotten some chewy stuff in their steak. And so just at the top sirloin section of that cut, there is some variability. And then with my research, we wanted to see within the ventral and the dorsal subunit, the bigger and the smaller portion, was there any tenderness variability there? Was there any differences in the color or the water holding capacity? And we found that there was. The dorsal subunit, being where the baseball sirloin traditionally would come from, was actually the lesser tender piece of meat, was actually a little bit paler in color, not quite that dark cherry red that folks were expecting. And so that was unexpected for us to find that the bigger piece of the sirloin was actually a smidge more tender, and could hold a little bit more water. So like, we as meat scientists were surprised in just the top sirloin cut itself.
So I don't know if you could hear it, Sierra, but the gasps amongst our listening audience right now were audible, even though this was a recording. Yes, it's really crazy to see. For so long, I've had anecdotally been told that the baseball top sirloin, that one particular smaller section subunit of the top sirloin center muscle, is by far going to be the more tender. Well, turns out Sierra was actually able to discover empirically, meaning we have actual data that says otherwise. And now it doesn't mean that it's drastically different in tenderness and that you should just grind all those and go away from it all. No, it just means that now we just have a better understanding of the top sirloin. And maybe if you isolate specific pieces and parts, as we've done with so many other cuts throughout the carcass, you might be able to add value overall to those pieces and parts. And another great example is the top sirloin cap.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, as Dr. Bass mentioned, there's this empirical data, and statistically looking at the USDA thresholds of tenderness, the gluteus medius muscle itself was statistically less tender than the biceps femoris, which is that sirloin cap, and then the gluteus accessoris that we'll talk about a little bit later. So it was less tender than those two muscles. The biceps femoris being the sirloin cap, or the culotte, which is gaining a lot of traction in today's meat market. It did have the darkest, most red beef color, which was excellent to find. And then it was statistically one of the lower on the tenderness, the Warner Brotzer Shear 4 scale. So being a more tender muscle than the traditional gluteus medius muscle that is being served traditionally to our consumers. So we're excited that the muscle that is taking off, whether that's in the grocery store or in restaurants, and people are getting excited about it on their plates, they actually can get excited about it from a scientific standpoint as well.
So you just mentioned one more muscle, and that's the gluteus accessorius. And so for those who are out there wondering if this is indeed a dinosaur from the Cretaceous period, it is not. This is actually this is a muscle that has been there the whole time on the beef carcass. And it was time to investigate a little bit further. And so Sierra, tell us a little bit about that unique creature.
Yes. So the gluteus accessorius butts right up against the gluteus profundus. And those two muscles sit on top of the entire center section and are so easy to peel off and incorporate into your grind. The profundus being the muscle that actually holds the hip bone to the rest of the top sirloin butt. So yes, it has a lot of connective tissue. It does a very difficult job of holding this entire, subprimal to a bone. So there's a lot of connective tissue there. That muscle should continue to be ground. However, the gluteus accessorius really marries right up against that muscle. It's fairly long. I forget the exact measurement, but it's about 6 inches in length or so. And it's approximately 1 inch in height, which is steak thickness. So we didn't have to go through and cut the gluteus accessorius into a steak thickness before having a grillable item in our hands, which is exciting for small meat packers who are looking for more items to give to customers. There's not a lot of cutting that has to be done with that steak, other than just take it out of your grind pile and put it into the cuts bin to be vacuum packaged and sent out the door. It's as easy as that. And so what we found with this muscle is when you separate it out, it's about the right length, about the right thickness, and when you grill it, it has the similar tenderness to that biceps femoris, that sirloin cap, the culotte. They're all in the same tenderness scale. It has really excellent water holding capacity. And so that means that steak is going to be really juicy. There is previous research that shows that consumers love to overcook sirloins. I'm sure it's because this muscle doesn't, or the subprimal doesn't marble as well as, say, the ribeye or something, closer to the chuck or the anterior portion of the animal. So there's not a lot of marbling to serve as that insurance policy. And so if our consumers are overcooking sirloins, maybe by accident, maybe because they, like a higher degree of doneness, the gluteus accessorius muscle is going to retain more water and going to have a more tender, juicy eating experience, which is fantastic. And we found that it's going to be tender, it's going to be juicy. The color on it is fairly dark, and that reddish color that consumers are expecting as well, not quite as light in color as the other gluteus medius portions of the top sirloin. And so why are we grinding this muscle? And I simply think it comes down to the lack of that muscle profiling research. It's an easy muscle to grind. So folks just didn't know it was underneath some of that connective tissue.
For so long, I would say a good majority of the meat cutters out there who have steamed out the top sirloin, they've called it the mouse muscle. And in reality, it's the mouse, as in it has two muscles in it. And why we call it the mouse is beyond me, because I don't know of anybody who really wants to eat mouse meat, but it's two muscles. And so it does take a little bit of additional fabrication, but with minimal fabrication, and considering the price of beef that we're going to be walking into in the next 3 years, and I don't want to put any alarm bells out there, but get ready, guys, because we're starting to have we're going to have a pretty small herd here going into the next couple of years, and so that means we need to get every little scrap of meat off this animal as possible. Another thing to think about too is that any larger processors out there who maybe service a resort or a cruise line or something like that, who are looking for easy to use, easy to grill, it's a steak that's ready to go, portioned off of the animal. Like nature took care of it for you. All you got to do is cut the darn thing and package it. This would be a great kind of specialty item. It's a little bit smaller, I would say, Sierra, 2/3 the size of a Terrace Major, maybe, which is a very popular cut, petite shoulder tender for the rest of the folks out there.
Since 1883, Ultrasource has been a trusted supplier to the food industry. Ultrasource provides superior kill floor, processing, packaging, and labeling equipment and operational supplies.
And we don't want to sit down and compare it against the Terrace Major because we didn't conduct that research. Would love if somebody else wants to conduct that research.
Excellent point. Excellent. Yep.
But some of the questions I did get while I was conducting my research is, well, you're only going to get one of these steaks. It's portion size, so one person's going to eat that cut off of one side of the carcass. So you only get two per animal. Is that really worth it? Well, if you think of the Terrace Major, that's a cut that's now being served in the restaurant industry and is being sliced up and served on salads. And there are only one per side, two per carcass. And it has it's started to become a substitute for tenderloin. The Terrace Major has. And so the Terrace Major, only getting one per side, is becoming more difficult to grasp onto. So maybe some of those restaurant folks who are using the Terrace Major, they might soon need an alternative for Terrace Major. And so enter the gluteus accessorius, which we so fondly would like to call the sirloin tender, which is an easy way for a consumer to remember. And they like to gravitate towards any steak that is called tender when they actually are.
I love it. You heard it here, folks. It has now been named. It is an item that I think we all need to be thinking more about. Again, I can't stress enough that we need to get the most that we can out of these beef carcasses from a profitability standpoint at the meat processors level, but also a profitability standpoint from the producer level, to make sure that we're sharing in some of those advantages at the meat level. Okay. All right. So you've mentioned an awful lot. I've been continuing to take notes here. I want to change gears just a little bit because I love the Top Sirloin project, and I think you shared a lot of great things on that. But I want to talk more about you and what's going on in Sierra's life these days. And if you haven't noticed already, Sierra is very bright, very driven, very dynamic and energetic, which was why she fits so well with our team, our research team. But Sierra has begun a meat consultation business out there called Butcher Solutions. What a great name, by the way. So Sierra, can you tell everyone about this, and maybe let's drum up some business for you?
Absolutely. Let's do it. Yeah. So this idea was for Butcher Solutions, which is a traveling meat cutting school, a traveling school for butchers. I will go to small meat processors and help them train employees so that we can have a more consistent labor force, a more well-trained labor force that is prepared to work in this industry and is going to stick around for the long haul. I drummed up this idea when I was a meat judging coach at the University of Wyoming, and it actually became the reason I wanted to go to grad school. Was as I was working with meat judging students and talking with meat processors, the number one thing that they were telling me was how difficult it was to find and retain skilled labor. And so as I was cutting, just subprimals or primals for my meat judgers, thinking that, wow, if I myself could become a better butcher and could know all the scientific names and I could teach folks in the industry about butchery techniques, wouldn't that be great? Then we could have more folks understanding the science behind meat products and be able to have more consistent meat products being turned out, and keep some of these small meat processors in business, and keep their customers happy too, and then the livestock producers that they serve as a result. And so I wanted to go to the University of Idaho because of the reputation of being able to cut meat with Dr. Phil Bass and learn all these cool scientific names and where everything came from, so that then myself could be a better butcher and I could teach others. And so I guess during my time at the University of Idaho was really looking forward to getting back into the industry as quickly as I could so I could start Butcher Solutions. And so I think a week after I had graduated in December, the business was established. And so I'm currently recording this podcast from a meat processor in Montana, where we are training 6 individuals at this meat processor. They had an injury with their primary meat cutter. A tendon just quit one day in his arm, and he was the only employee of this facility. And so it just so happened that a lumber mill had also burned down in town, and there were folks looking for employment. And so their meat lab manager said, well, I guess if they can run a bandsaw, to cut wood, they could probably run a bandsaw to cut meat. And so he hired me to come in and train their employees. This group of 5 folks, anywhere from working at a lumber mill. One gal came from New Zealand. She was building boats in New Zealand and liked to tan hides, but had never worked in the meat industry before. And so now these 6 individuals are working at this meat processing plant, and we've been working on the harvest and fabrication of beef this is the 3rd week now. And the whole goal is that these will then be the folks who work in this facility full time, and they want to know everything from, why are some muscles more red than others? Why are grocery store cuts of beef super bright red and the ones that we turn out a little bit more purple? Where I worked at this meat processing plant and we called this the Delmonico steak, but it looks a lot like a ribeye. Why is that? And so there's so many. Yeah, exactly. Oh, so there's so much that even folks who work in the meat industry have questions about. And one of the gals, she did work at a processor just right up the road, and she kept saying, they have workshops for the folks in our building who like to grind the meat and who make the recipes and sausage, and there are workshops for the processing meat side of things. There aren't workshops that teach you hands-on meat fabrication. There isn't a place I can go to learn these different cuts and why a chef might call it one thing and we call it something else. And so she was really excited to learn the scientific names and where all the cuts come from. And so the whole point behind Butcher Solutions is that I hope that I can cater meat science education to whatever a small meat processor might need to better, train and educate their workers and add value to those people, so that then they want to stick around and continue working this job for a while, because it's not easy work to stand on cold wet concrete every day. But if you can add value and make them excited about what they're offering to their customers, then I think you're going to just add value to your workforce.
Well, and such a good compliment to a previous podcast that we just published with Kevin Trosclair and his operation up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Mountain View Custom Meats. Check them out if you haven't already. But a really neat business model where they're doing their best to maintain employment. But what happens when the worst happens? And let's make lemonade out of lemons, and that's exactly what it sounds like you're doing right now, Sierra. All the stars seem to align, and the timing was just right. And so it sounds like we're going to be able to really help out a business that otherwise could have gone into some really struggling times. And Sierra's there to help. At the risk of Sierra taking away all of my time, where I get to go out and train butchers, which is, I'll be honest, it's not as much time as I'd like. How can folks get a hold of you now, Sierra, and get you to their plants to help train their team?
Absolutely. So the website just went live last week, which I'm really excited about. So it is butchersolutionsllc.com, and people can hop on there. All of my contact information, everything that, the meat science education offerings that I am excited to come and meet your team and perform myself, are all on there. I am located in Livingston, Montana. And again, I am working with a meat processor out here. They are a nonprofit meat processor, so they are more than willing to have folks come in and train. All the products we turned out are ground and put into ground beef for the food banks here in Montana. And so if you've never processed meat ever before, but you want to, but you're afraid to mess something up, no worries. You can come to Montana and it's all going to get ground anyway, so we can teach you. But if you are a small processor that either is looking to hire a new crew, or you have a crew and you just want to send them through some meat science training, the whole point is it's a traveling butcher school and I will come to you. So yeah, hop on butchersolutionsllc.com, check it out and let me come and work with you.
Yeah. So, okay. And one more time, that's Butcher Solutions, not butchers, but butchersolutionsllc.com. Make sure you reach out to her. I know that you will learn something. I always learn something anytime I get a chance to visit with Sierra. One more thing, Sierra, before we wrap things up, something we ask pretty much all of our guests on here at least once is, how did you get into the meat business?
I was a student at Ohio State University, and I grew up on a beef cattle farm. And my senior year at Ohio State, I wanted to take the beef production class, and it was full, and I couldn't fit it in my schedule. I was actually an ag business major too, and so I didn't ever want to be a vet, so I just wanted to take this beef class, and it was full. So I was like, well, I guess I'll take meat science. That's kind of the same thing as beef cattle. So by the second day of my senior year at Ohio State, I added this class. And by day 2, I had joined the meats judging team. I had got a job working the meat lab. I decided to take a 5th year just so I could only take meat science classes. And from there, I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but the opportunity to be a meat judging coach first came along, and then this idea for a business came along, and grad school helped me start the business. So the ball just keeps rolling. So who knows where now Butcher Solutions will take me within the meat industry, but I'm sure it's just going to keep snowballing from here. But the opportunities are endless as long as you just keep your door open.
Absolutely. Well, and this is just such another great example for those who are out there and might be scratching their head as to what's the next move. Just look around, because those opportunities do abound. They may not be as obvious, and sometimes might be even a little frustrating because it wasn't the path that you thought you were going to go down. But look at what Sierra's doing right now, and take those opportunities as they do come, and take some of those frustrating times as almost blessings at times, to know that something else good might be just around the corner and you just didn't know it yet. And so this is such a great opportunity. Sierra, thank you so much for joining us today. And you know what? Let's keep talking. Let's keep talking about how we continue to train the workforce, because that is such a huge part of the challenges that we're encountering right now. One of the biggest questions that I continue to get is, how do we get more folks involved? And if they're even just less than just 0.5% of the population out there, like Sierra, who all you got to do is introduce them to the meat world, we could fix a lot of problems very, very quickly. And for any size processor, large or small, and I don't care if it's beef fabrication, pork sausage, you name it. Sometimes we just need to get folks involved and take that opportunity to share the idea with them. And so this might indeed, Sierra's direction and her business might indeed be a way of introducing a new population of young folks to a really cool career path. So again, Sierra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.